Greetings, everybody. Welcome to today's presentation. It's the second session of Regenerating Atlanta's Forests Can Start in Your Own Backyard, and we're so glad that you're here with us today. My name is Elizabeth Beek. I'm on the education team with Trees Atlanta. We also have Rebecca Gilbert, who's the Director of Education, here with us today, and we're excited to be partnering with Ecologic on today's seminar. You can drop any questions that you might have in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll be trying to answer as many as possible today during the session. We're going to start off today with a couple of housekeeping slides. First of all, we want to thank you all for being here today with Trees Atlanta and Ecologic. Education and the programs that we have, such as today's Lunch and Learn, are a really important part of our mission at Trees Atlanta. We aim to protect and improve Atlanta's urban forests through planting programs that are happening throughout the city right now, especially during Georgia Arbor Week and month. And there's also a lot of great opportunities to do conservation work and restoration work throughout the city, and programs such as today's Lunch and Learn. You can see more of those at our website. And today's session would not be as accessible or possible without the support of the City of Atlanta. They're wonderful sponsors for our urban forest education programs. And for those of you who have not joined us for a virtual program before, it is really helpful if you have a question to use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen on the toolbar, and we'll go through those today kind of in order and discuss those questions live. And also after this presentation, we'll be sending out a survey, and those are so helpful. Your feedback helps us create a better program for you next time. There's so much great stuff happening at Trees Atlanta right now and throughout the year. And the best way to find out about those opportunities are on social media. And you can also scan this QR code and sign up for some of our newsletters. So today is the second session, How to Get Started on Your Regeneration Project. This is part of a 4-part series. The first 3 are virtual, and the final one is actually in the field at one of our city forest certified sites, and our partners are letting us come out and practice some of the techniques and tips that we've learned with Ecologic on that site. And City in the Forest certification is one of our newest certification programs. It is so much fun to do. You can do it on your backyard, your community garden, a community park site. There's many different scales and many different partners, from working with the Amphibian Foundation to Birds Georgia. So we encourage you to learn more about City Forest certification and how you can certify your space at the website below. And it is a great honor to get to partner with Tea. Tea is the founder of Ecologic and today's speaker. The mission of Ecologic is to inspire responsible stewardship of native ecologies for healthier land and communities. And in today's session, we're going to really dive into how you can get started on your forest regeneration project, and tips to help you start, and things that Tea sees out there happening that are very good to avoid as far as common mistakes. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go ahead and let Tea share their screen.
I'm going to give you a little rundown, to reorient us, especially for those of you who didn't catch the first part of this series. We started with, just what regeneration is, how to think about the fundamentals of regeneration and apply them to your goals with your landscape, and what responsive management is, which is really the basis of regenerative land management. So let's get started. Here's some of the things we covered. Why regeneration works. Well, we talked about it being site specific. It's always going to be completely dependent on the site. This is why we have to do consultations. So you got to go through and do observation. So there is no one size fits all. There is no like golden solution. I do get asked a lot when people are like, oh, what should I do for this particular thing? And the thing is, regeneration doesn't just want to look at one little thing, it wants to look at how everything is connected so that you can make a better decision about how things are going to behave in the future, right? So if I only know that you have an English ivy problem and you have steep slopes, there's still so much information that I'm not getting that I would get from being there and experiencing it. And this is true of everybody, you know? We talked about it being based in ecology, right? Observation is really where we're getting our direction from. Of course, we have goals, but the way that we achieve them and the way that we make decisions about the actions we're going to take are going to be extremely dependent on the observations we're taking, as well as seasonality. I would almost argue that seasonality is more important than observation. Uh, they might be tied. And so is this, they're all three so important. So are the stages of succession. I bolded and italicized those because you really just don't want to forget any of those three things. The seed bank and cyclical inputs, those are important too, but those three things you really have to remember because that's how you're going to do your responsive management. So really quickly, when we talk about the stages of succession, what I'm talking about is this very predictable pattern that an environment goes through that we can recognize essentially and use to our advantage. So when we start with a simpler environment, which in our case in the Piedmont, that would be a grassland, somewhere where there's been a big disruption over time, that is going to develop into shrubs and small trees and eventually into a forest. Once the forest starts to establish, we call that secondary succession. But it's not like there's just one or the other, right? There's many, many levels and steps in between that constitute primary and secondary succession. And it's very mutable. It's really for our own benefit that we have these definitions that helps us conceive of what's actually going on, because a 300-year-old forest, even though it might technically be a secondary succession forest, is not at all the same as a 20-year-old forest. And we can see how the ecology changes over time. And you can actually speed up those steps if you know what your landscape wants to be, essentially. One of the other main reasons that this works is that we're prioritizing soil. If you look at that photo, you can see a very, very close up of some small rocks on some bare dirt. And this was where someone was doing a project in their backyard and they didn't cover the soil. Those rocks are about as big as my like fingernail. And it was one rain in the afternoon, like an afternoon summer rain for like 2 hours. You can see how like tall those little peaks of soil are underneath each one of those. What that tells you is what a huge difference it makes to cover the soil, you know, even with a small little piece of gravel like that, how much less dirt is getting washed away. So think about cumulative effects. It's not about having a big push, you know, doing a big makeover all at once. It's about preventing little things like this, right? That over time completely degrade your seed banks so that you don't have anything to regenerate, or maybe not nothing, but you don't have as much diversity as you might have had if we had done something really simple, like put down some wood chips. And the other thing we want to be aware of is that when the soil gets degraded as well, it no longer retains the elements of being soil, which is that it's alive. You need that biology, for it to actually function as soil. So soil does many things for not just us and the plants, but for the planet as a whole. But one of the things that it does that I think that it's easy for us to forget because we don't really see it, is it does gas exchange, right? So it is breathing all those little organisms in there, and they are doing all of this nutriment exchange with the atmosphere, um, decomposers. Of course, we have mycorrhizae. Everybody knows about the mycelium by now, which is super, super important. But it's not just them. There's little bacteria and all kinds of other amazing things going on in there. And that's one of the reasons that we love wood chips so much, is that they really do a terrific job for cheap, free of amending our soils, you know, not too much effort. And that brings us to really like a big thing that I think should be a huge selling point about regeneration, but because we're an impatient species, it takes a little adjusting of our perspective. But it's an incredibly effective and efficient use of your resources. The whole idea of regeneration is you're not going to waste anything, right? All of your inputs, everything you want to put into your landscape, ideally should be cyclical, right? Because you're respecting how the landscape is behaving and you are supporting that. So you're not going to have to, water a very, very thirsty plant that's in a place that's too hot for it, because you made a better decision than that, right? You put your rain garden in the wet spot. So now you get to have all of your water loving plants. Or maybe you do a little terracing because your neighbor is dumping all of their rainwater from their roof into your yard and it's carving out a channel. So we can look at these things as problems, same way that we can look at trash as trash, or we can look at them as, another way to think about things. So over time, really what this means is you're going to spend less time managing the land once you've supported that regeneration. But of course it does take years in these spaces that have been degraded for sometimes up to 100 years. So we can't have unreasonable expectations of it, but it does happen. It does work. It does take less effort. It does take less money. But again, over time, it takes more money on the front end. But if you look at how much it costs to maintain, especially lawns, versus how much it costs to maintain a biodiverse habitat, it's a pittance. And that's what we're aiming for. And then, of course, there's less collateral damage, which we love, not just, to our ecology, but to ourselves, because we're not using chemicals. We're not degrading things further. And the last thing I want to say about that, stacked functionality of your interventions is one of the ways that, without even having to think about it, you will achieve this. So if you just ensure that everything that you do to your landscape does at least two things, it's not just for one purpose. If you can at least identify two things that it does to support the regeneration of your site, then you will be golden. And that's pretty easy, as it turns out, as I'm going to show you. So this is a photo of, what it is that we are trying to avoid and why it is we're doing things the way that we are doing things. This is an example of the landscape sliding away, the green infrastructure that we would rely on to hold our literal foundation of our homes is the root systems, all of this stuff holding things in place. So when we bulldoze and grade an area, unfortunately, this happens quite often. And I see this a lot. So that's what that's a photo of. And even so, you can see some pachyra blooming in the background. So it's never like a foregone conclusion that everything is bad. In fact, a lot of the first pioneering species are some of the ones that I've collected the most seed from, because they are aggressive competitors to the invasives. So in disrupted areas, if you can find natives in those areas, they tend to be the fighters, the winners. Also, there was lots of cottonwoods on this lot. I've got a lot of nice, lovely little cottonwood trees from this lot, and you can see one right in the middle of the picture there, as well as poke, which is a champion. We love the pokeweed. So last thing we covered real quick, I want to summarize from part 1 is what responsive management is going to require of you, because you may not want to do this. And one of the things to think about, of course, is your timeline, right? So if you're looking at a place that maybe is going to get developed and it's for sure, you don't want to try and regenerate that forest, because it's, that's wasted effort. You would be better served moving the plants of import in there out of that space, somewhere where they can live out their lives and flourish and propagate, right? Don't try and take down everybody on your own. And don't try and do everything that yourself. So that's really what we're talking about when we're like toggling scale, right? Think about the small stuff and the big stuff. Go between the two of them, and you won't get too caught up in like what's happening right in front of your face, or that the planet is burning down. There's a sweet spot. When we're talking about nurturing reciprocity, really what that means is you're creating that relationship with the land so that you understand what it is that you're observing, right? You're starting to see those patterns. You see how, seasonality is affecting your site. It gets wetter at certain times of year, it gets drier at certain times of year, so on and so forth. It seems very like obvious, but we don't learn to have this at the forefront of our minds when we're just moving through a space and making decisions about how we're going to behave. And what responsive management asks of you is that is your first consideration, right? You're considering everyone and everything around you as you make these decisions. And it's going to be an ongoing thing, right? You have to embrace that this is a routine. The same way that you wake up in the morning and you brush your teeth and you comb your hair, and you feed yourself, and you get ready to go. The landscape isn't going to like suddenly take care of itself. What we know more and more from what's the word I'm looking for? Archaeological. Can you say this word, Elizabeth? I'm stuck on it. But anyway, we have evidence that very conclusively shows there really isn't any part of the planet where human beings live, especially where they thrive, that hasn't been managed for millennia by humans. So this is a relationship, it's not going to go away. You can't just get the landscape to a point where it's good. So you're committing to being a steward. But again, your effort should be a lot less over time if you're treating it with this reciprocity. And everything you do will lead to biodiversity, which in the end will serve all of those issues that we are so scared of, like erosion and the landscape slipping away, trees falling on our houses, floods. Your cure-all for that is to support more biodiversity, ultimately. If you can do that to your fullest ability, you'll have far less of these problems, especially if you can convince people around you to do that. Because again, cumulative effects. Lastly, I asked you guys to think about some questions, or kind of gave you some examples of the types of questions you really should be asking yourself before you get, too attached to your vision. The main one being, what are the limits of what you can do on your site? There are definitely things that you can and can't do, right? I'm never going to be an acrobat. Humans are kind of the same way. So I could train pretty good, maybe get more flexible and learn some tricks, but I'm never going to be a professional acrobat. And we just don't want to have unreasonable expectations, because that's how we get disappointed. So we get demotivated. So, don't ask your landscape to do something that it can't do, or that you would really have to force it to do, because that's where we're talking about those resources, right? That's what a lawn is, really. You're just forcing the landscape to be something that it's really hard for it to be, that requires a lot of energy, right? I don't want to do that. So part of that is just understanding how it's behaving, and part of how a landscape behaves is it's the organisms that are behaving on it. So who's using it? Do you have kids? Do you have a dog? Dogs are allergic to some things, like grapes. So if you have a bunch of muscadine grapes, as much as I love them, in your mature oak, wherever, maybe you don't want to have the dog run over there. Just things to consider. Same with things in the lily family, I'm pretty sure, are not great for dogs. Fortunately, we don't have a ton of native plants like that. In fact, I think most of the things that are not great for animals or small kids are invasive. So you'd want to get rid of them anyway. And then what is it that you're like going for? Do you want a gathering space for you and your friends? Or are you just trying to have more birds? Right? And so what do birds need versus what do you need? Right? So if you're trying to have a gathering space, you're not going to make that close to the wet spot where all the mosquitoes are, even though it's kind of flat, because you're going to think about how it feels like to be in that space and how annoying it's going to be in the middle of summer, because you've experienced the space and you've done that observation. And look, it's not like you're writing down, oh, a mosquito bit me today, but it's just the fact that you have that experience. That's how you build, that's how you accumulate knowledge, right? And from all of that, you should really be able to tell pretty well what your main challenges are going to be. Is it that you have to accommodate certain types of usage, or egress? Do people walk there or whatever? Or do deer walk there? So the same way that we have corridors that we use on a regular basis, like we have certain routes that we take to get to where it is that we go on a regular basis, all wildlife has the same type of behavior. Most animals like to poop in pretty much exactly the same place. So do we. They like to eat in pretty much the same areas. And you can see evidence of this. So you can really understand who is using your space if you pay attention. And when you start to regenerate your yard, it gets really exciting because the animals don't want to be seen. So you're not going to see them most of the time. You're just going to see evidence of them. But you have to be able to recognize it. And that's where that, redefining and learning to recognize where you're doing a good job really comes into play, because you might be doing a good job, but you might not be able to tell. And I don't want you to get demotivated. The whole reason I'm doing this, honestly, is it just kills me that so many people convince themselves that they can't do this, or that it isn't for them because they have a bad experience that could have been really easily avoided, or they feel like they're just spinning their wheels, they're getting nowhere. And I go out there and I'm like, no, this is great. There's all these things happening. So looking at some challenges on your site, there's that bamboo barrier, right? So if you're gonna keep bamboo out of your yard, and your neighbor does not want to get rid of the bamboo, if you don't want to continually dig up rhizomes, one of the only options you have is to put in a barrier, unfortunately. This is my least favorite intervention that we offer, not only because it's labor intensive and time consuming, which makes it expensive, but also it doesn't work that great. I'd rather just get rid of all the bamboo, but that requires everybody being on board. So one of the big challenges to it is we have lots of topography in Atlanta, right? You're trying to put in a straight piece of very inflexible plastic into the ground. If that angle changes anywhere, like the barrier has to be a certain depth to be effective, at least 2 feet. So it's a pretty significant hole. And you can see how that, hopefully that hill on the left is very wobbly, which is why we had to cut it in order to accommodate the change in angles. But what that means for the bamboo is now there's a break. So that's what we would call a hot spot. Now, compared to how it would be if that whole side didn't have anything, it's much more manageable. So in my opinion, this is still like a good regenerative technique, right? Because you're going to have less management over time. You've eliminated a lot of the issue, a lot of the degradation that's going to come in. And it's just about as much as you can do with something like this. In this other picture, I'm showing you what some debris reintegration might look like, and also site organization might look like. You don't have to have just piles of sticks piled up high. You can be a little creative with it. This ended up being a rain bed. So this is the beginning of a hugelkultur rain bed. At this point, we hadn't quite decided if we were going to make it a rain bed. We were just storing our dead wood here, and then we ended up digging it out and making a nice rain bed. Okay, so now we're into part 2. Unfortunately, we're still in the preparation phase. I know there's so many things to think about and so many things to get squared away. But look, if you don't want to do the mistakes that I made, this is what I'm trying to save you the trouble of. I really encourage you to get like some inspiration just walking around some of these green spaces. We talked about a little about the questions you should be asking yourself when you're deciding your goals and what it is that you want to do in a space, but you also want to think about how it is that you feel in a space. What are the things that you like when you go to a certain type of area? Like, do you like running water in a stream, or is it not really like your thing? Do you want the big trees? Do you want a little open meadow? Do you want to transition? What are the things that make you feel good? And what are you trying to get more of? Tune into that. Visit, explore, and to plug myself a little bit, please go visit Fernbank, where we've been regenerating the forest for the past 6 years now. Shit. If you walk into the actual forest, you will start to see our brush berms. Those are all areas where we've worked, where we've been employing all these techniques that I'm telling you about. Another one that I love is Nearly Native Nursery. I think they started off with like a lot that had been raised. I'm not sure. I think I remember him saying that it was like lawn after they had gone in. So as far as I know, unless someone corrects me, they replanted the whole thing with a whole new palette of native and almost very nearly native Piedmont plants. And what they've also done is they have implemented earthwork throughout the property, because it's like a lot of Georgia. It's got a nice slope to it. So instead of letting their water just run down that slope, they've directed it, along the slope with a series of dry creeks. And I guess you'd call it a retaining pond, but it doesn't look like the square retaining ponds that you have next to the the parking lot, right? There's all kinds of plants and stuff growing in there. And it's this type of situation that you would expect around a bog. It's really great. So they've got upland stuff and it's been there for, I think, almost 40 years. Oops, I need to go back. And then the other thing you should really do is talk to the people around you, if not to get inspired, just to avoid the really, it's really easy to avoid the miscommunication of people thinking that what's happening on your property is a mistake. Because that can, depending on where you live, that can really upset some folks. So just be communicative, let folks know what's going on. And a lot of the time, they'll be really into it. They might even want to help you. They might even want to help you, like beyond going out there with their time and their physical help, and like monetarily want to help you, especially if you get more of the neighbors on board. And this is something that you're interested in doing, like regenerating a creekway, which we have a lot of amazing ones in people's backyards that still have incredible old trees and stuff. But it's too much to do with one person. It's not too much to do with the community, right? And on top of that, you can share your resources as far as plants and seed, right? Someone's going to have seeds and plants that you don't have, and that immediately is biodiversity for free, just because you talked to someone and made a friend. And honestly, just talking to other people about like the things that I'm hung up on or the things that I'm thinking about makes me come up with better methodology and better ideas. Share your stories about what it is that you're doing. If something's really working well or not working at all, probably someone has come across the same thing. And this community is growing in Atlanta. There are more folks tuning into this, so more ways to brainstorm. All right. Still in preparation. Make a map. It doesn't have to look like this. This is our the angles we were taking photos many years ago. We don't do it like this at all. We only take like 2 photos now. This was very intense. You don't have to do all that. What you really need, for most of you, because you're going to have a pretty small thing, is where you're getting in and out. Where's the road? Like, where's your door? Is there a back door? Is there a driveway? What's built? When we're talking about defining features, those are the features that like stand out, and they're the first things that you notice about the space. So that's what you want to put on there. Don't try and get every little teeny tiny tree and every little teeny tiny thing. So for your environmental defining features, definitely if there's any flowing water or not flowing water, anywhere where there would be water flowing, like a dry creek, which is just a depression that turns into a creek when it rains. It's, the same thing. It doesn't have water all the time. You can look up maps for what your watershed is pretty easily. You can also do soil testing pretty easily. You send it into oh shoot,
UGA.
cool. Yeah, UGA. I'm a brain fart. Things like shade and aspect. Aspect's important, and so is shade, and so is topography, and so are microclimates. But those you might take a little bit longer to understand how those are playing out on your site, because as the seasons move, those things are going to change. And it's really important to know before you start making full decisions about where you have part shade, because you might have full shade there later. Aspect is, I'm just going to define that really quick. Aspect is when people talk about north facing or south facing, right? It's the type of sun that they're getting. And what that really affects is how warm that area gets and how consistently warm it is. South facing is going to be warmer, north facing is going to be colder and shadier. So generally, south facing, you're going to have more variety of stuff. That doesn't mean that there aren't things that don't grow on north facing slopes. It just means that especially the things that people are really attracted to in the native nurseries that are a little showier, right? They like the richer soils, which is not what a north-facing soil is. Those are the ones that are getting windswept, that are going to have rocks, little crags and stuff, which has very interesting stuff. So we just need to be a little bit more creative. You know, it's not all azaleas all the time. And probably one of the next things, or, last things you want to include in this is where your plant communities are. So what that really means is, you're starting to notice that you've got a community of goldenrods and dog fennel in the next to the driveway next to your house. That's not the same as in the backyard where you have a bunch of loblolly pines. You can start to identify those things. You don't have to get too into it yet, right? You'll see more, you'll parse out more and understand who likes to grow with who more as you start to notice these things and do this work and walk around and say hello to your neighbors. Okay, still preparing before we've even started. You are going to look at what are actually the things that you can physically do to this landscape. There's so many more regeneration options than what I've listed here. These are just some ones that I thought, maybe most of you or some of you might not have heard of. Like solarization is when you're going to put down a clear sheet of plastic and secure it in place and basically bake the ground to kill whatever's in there. There's many problems with that. Going back to soil health, remember how the soil is alive. Nobody likes to be baked. It definitely kills all of that microbiology. And it also prevents it from doing gas exchange in addition to cooking them. So if you're going to do something like solarization, right, you're using that because you have to. It's not something you just do. And that's kind of like where I'm getting at with these interventions. You really want to use the ones that are appropriate for your situation. So you don't need to solarize that liriope patch in your backyard because it's not necessary to sacrifice all of the good that would sacrifice in order to get rid of the bad that you're trying to get rid of. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Same with sheet mulching. Sheet mulching prevents that gas exchange, which ultimately lowers the microbiology count in the soil. So it can be pretty harmful to it. The way that we get around it in our practices, we don't do large areas. Now, I will admit, I had to learn this mistake. And gosh, mistakes are the best teachers. So I'm never going to tell you not to make mistakes, but I'm hoping you'll make better ones than me. If you solarize a smaller area, right, all of that surrounding area is still alive, it can move in easier. It's the same like if you have a wound, you have a huge gaping wound. It's a lot harder for your skin to heal, to heal that skin. You can kind of think of it the same way. And this sheet mulch does sort of act similarly. So we like to do it staggered over time, allow it to break down a little bit and reintroduce that microbiology before we continue on. This is a picture of a site where we are just starting, and you can see how, invasive management shouldn't necessarily look like we're getting everything out. We're being very targeted with these first sweeps. So, habitat expansion, plant propagation is just putting in more native plants. Some of these natural constructions we don't really use. Pretty much what we use the most are the dead hedges and the brush ferns, because this is how we're going to also manage our debris. It's a great way to reintegrate and recycle those resources that would otherwise be lost if you just threw them in the trash. Just all that stuff, all that those minerals and those nutrients that those plants used in order to grow themselves as big as they did, you want that back in the soil for your other plants. Don't get rid of it. Cairns don't have to be destructive, horrible things that people do to the stream. You can be really intentional with them. I don't know if anybody knows about this, but sometimes folks go into the streamways and they move all the rocks around and they pile them up, and it's horrible for the salamanders and the other amphibians that make their homes there. Well, that's not what I'm talking about for your yard and your regeneration efforts. If you have a bunch of stone or something, and you're having to dig out a rain garden or whatever, you can use that at your creek edge or your wet spot or whatever to create a different situation, because essentially what biodiversity is just many different types of situations that host many different types of organisms. So as many elements, heights, textures, all these things that you can think of, that creates more biodiversity. Earthworks is anytime we're going to move earth, and erosion mitigation definitely is something that you can do with earthworks, but you don't only have to mitigate your erosion with earthworks. One of the simplest things you can do is put down wood chips, which we will be getting to. All right, so you're going to choose a direction. You have to figure out which interventions you're going to do first, because you probably need more than one. Most people try and do their invasive removal in the summer because it's when they're noticing it. It's the worst time to do your invasive removal, especially if you have dense English ivy. You want to do that stuff in the winter. You also got to look at what is degrading your space the quickest, right? If the English ivy is like chill and it's not on the trees, maybe it's not a priority to pull off of the ground. There's probably something that's taking up more space, that's doing more damage, that you want to get to first. And of course, you got to think about how much time you can actually devote to this. And if you're going to pay someone to help you, how much money you can actually devote to this, because we want it to be a sustained thing. Don't tire yourself out. Don't, use up all your resources. Which brings me to organize your site. Before you even start creating stuff, which you're going to create stuff immediately, if you're taking out invasives, you need somewhere to put it. And you want to have a system about how you're going to organize it so that you can use it in the future. That's what reintegration is about. All right, we're almost ready to get in the field. Look at us, we're getting dressed. You're going to get your tools, because now you know what actual interventions you're going to undertake. You know whether or not you need loppers or rakes or whatever. Here are some of the ones that we use on a regular basis. This is a Nigiri Gama. It's also known as a hand hoe. It's excellent for doing Liriope especially. This is a soil knife. A lot of you will have seen this. So on and so forth. Your PPE is extremely important, and it goes beyond just long sleeves and pants and head and neck cover, okay? It's really easy to get like debris and little bits in your eyes. So you really should have, I wear sunglasses and that's not ideal, but you really should have some sort of eye covering. Same with insect repellent. There are, the mosquitoes don't play and they carry diseases around here. And we're getting new and horrible types of ticks in Georgia. And I've seen so many. So make use of these tools, or, be aware of them, because that shouldn't be the reason that you're deciding you can't get out there. There's very easy to get around them. And just like doing what this crew member is doing with the tucked in socks is so incredibly helpful. So cover all of those points of entry that they can get at you. And then think about the other things that you might need on site, like a first aid kit, or what apps do you need? to do your ID? Do you need to flag stuff that you need to come back to later? Do you want to tag stuff? So we talked about field safety. You should have your phone. I don't recommend listening to music or anything else because part of being responsive is being able to be aware of what's going on around you. So if something changes very quickly, like the hawks start screaming or the weather suddenly changes, it's amazing how people with headphones on don't notice these things, but you will because you're going to be tuned in. Anything that could be a hazard to you in the future, just, make yourself aware of it on the front end. And then the last thing that I'm going to touch on before we start taking questions to finish this next time is body mechanics. So many folks get out into the field and just like immediately hurt their backs or their arms because they don't know how to move their bodies in a way that's sustainable. So it's not, as simple as just picking up the tool and getting at it. And in fact, if you're putting a lot of effort into it, you're probably using the tool wrong because the whole point of these tools is supposed to make your life easier, or it might not be the right tool for the job. And that's why I also encourage you to just look at the whole gamut of tools. There are so many. We're going to talk more about tools. And next time, don't cut yourself on your tools by leaving them open. It's very silly. The last part of getting ready is developing your SOP, which is your standard operating procedure. So we talked about being safe. But if you're going to practice responsive management, you really want to have this routine down so that you don't have to think about it. You start with observation, you end with observation. This way, you're being responsive, right? This way, you have a direction and a plan for next time. And you've looked at the space, you've seen it. So you didn't forget any tools or leave anything behind that you meant to do. You have that reminder. I really recommend doing a before photo even before you even touch anything, and including an after photo as part of your closing walkthrough. This is really going to help you conceptualize what it is that you're doing and just recognize that you've done anything at all. And of course, in between those things, you're going to do your intervention, which starts with access and then actually moves on to the action that you're trying to take, and then is always going to end with aftercare. I have determined session targets and other things in here, but really you guys can develop whatever operating procedure makes sense for you. This is for how we work out in the woods. So a lot of the time we have to have a little home base. Maybe you're just off of your porch, but you want to have everything consolidated in one place where you can get it. It's the same as cooking. Like don't have all of your ingredients where you can find them. Don't have them strewn about your house. So these are some examples of some of the things that you might observe to help you understand your site. Over there on the left, you have a photo of a tree trunk. You'll notice some scars on it. Those scars are left over from wisteria. So now you can see, right? Now we know that this property previously had wisteria just by looking at this tree. You've got woodpecker activity there. You've got great blue heron and looks like chipmunk. There's a burrow of some kind. I don't know who's living in there. That leaf that's folded up, that is a caterpillar. The tree with the scars on it, the other one that look like stripes, that's deer rubbings. They get the floof on their horns. They have to use the trees to not just to mark them, but to rub it off. And that photo at the top is actually what the deer's beds look like. So you might be hiking around the woods and kind of notice that there's a depression or a bare spot. It's the deer bed. I love to find them. Elizabeth, how am I on time? Do I have to stop?
I would say that if this is a good stopping point and we can continue on in the next session, we
Okay.
have some questions for you. We could pause. Wonderful. Thank you so much. A couple of questions have come up. One from Monica who asked, uh, I think originally you had shown a slope that had some pictures of pokeweed, and you mentioned your love for pokeweed. And Monica was curious about why you love pokeweed for forest regeneration.
Well, yeah, it's one of those pioneering species. It comes in super easy. You don't have to do very much for it to start coming in. It's going to be very aggressive against native, invasives. So it's great to use in an area where you have something else is going crazy that you're in the process of taking out, right? One that I can think of is what's it called? The reedy one that goes close to the water. Japanese something, knotweed. So something like knotweed is totally
Mhm.
insane. Very appropriate to have to put pokeweed in that space. It can really hold its own. But not only that, it is a huge host for invertebrates and birds. The birds love the berries, like universally. Not just the birds, possums, raccoons, coyotes even eat the berries. And the leaves, if you pay attention, you'll notice there's all kinds of caterpillars just munching down on them. So I know they get a bad rep for looking kind of weird and they get scraggly towards the end of the summer. And I'm not saying they have to be right in front of your house, right? You could even prune them up to look, you know, more less, I don't know.
More aesthetically
There
pleasing.
you go. Yeah, to look better. You don't have to let them go like that. But when you get like a poke forest and there's a whole bunch of them together, just like really, really dense, it's a pretty impressive effect because they can get huge and they support each other and they have that, especially like in the high summer, they have that wonderful contrast of just like deep, deep magenta against that bright, bright green. It's
Yeah.
like that kind of green. I don't know. It's like a Dr. Seuss plant. They're so funky. I just love them.
That sounds great. And I know with in our family, we like to collect them and try to make natural dyes and things too. So there's lots of great
Yeah.
things. Savannah asked if you could clarify what is Basque habitat?
What is what habitat?
Basque habitat, BASK.
Oh, what's a basque?
Okay.
A basque is it's another kind of rock formation. So Karen is going to be stacked up a little higher with more crevices. A basque is usually flatter stones you're going to put towards the water's edge, just for like, things like turtles would go up and bask. If it's too steep at an edge, right, they don't have those spaces. So it's just that shallow formation where they can easily, um, what's the opposite of submerge? Emerge?
I think so. That's great. That was very helpful. Carolyn, who is participating today, also commented that the stocks of the pokeweed at the end of the season are also likely overwinter homes for many insects. So that's
Yes.
an additional pokeweed plus. To go on to another question, Monica asked, what are some of the tools or ideas that you at Ecologic use to deal with copperhead snakes in the wild? They've experienced bites multiple times and have not appreciated them.
Oh my goodness. I have never met anybody who's gotten bitten multiple times. You must smell good.
Do you have any tools or ideas or
Well, what we
tips
do,
for Monica?
yeah, so what we do is we just move the area around a lot. That's one of the reasons why the soft rake, the leaf rake, is like one of my top tools. It's not just for getting stuff out of your way and absolutely necessary for that. You need a leaf rake. Your life will be changed. But also, if you go in there, with your rake first, make a lot of noise and a lot of movement. Most of the time, the snake's not going to want to be around there. It's not 100% though, because the thing with copperheads is they're so docile. Like I've almost, I've almost picked one up before accidentally just working around them, and they don't really care. So beyond that, I stomp around a lot when I know that it's copperhead season. A lot of the sites that I have where I know I have copperheads, I've identified where they like to hang out, where their burrows are. And again, going back to seasonality, if you really just like avoid those spaces when they're the most active times of year, it should be okay. So
And
work,
can you remind us when copperheads are most active?
yes, absolutely. Towards the end of the summer months, right before they're going to go into hibernation, they tend to get more active. It's kind of like the yellow jackets. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
winter, especially like late winter moving into spring, they're not really around. You won't really be seeing them. They're going to come out later.
Okay. And
Um,
just a follow up from Carolyn that she has many of them in her backyard and has a beautiful picture of a 2 feet one from her foot. One of these copperheads 2 feet from her foot. And she said that she also tends to do what you say, like disturb the area
I'd be really
loudly.
interested to check this spot out just to see how
Yes.
what it is that they love about it so much. There must be
Yes.
something, and
Yeah.
that's the thing.
She said that they eat lots of the ticks. So she
Oh,
appreciates the copperheads. And they eat the ticks by way of the rodents that they eat. So they help with that in her ecosystem.
see, everything's connected. Isn't it beautiful?
It is. Well, we're about out of time, and I just wanted to thank everybody so much. And T, thank you so much for sharing ways to get started on our forest regeneration projects. I know we'll have more coming up in the upcoming sessions. Some other upcoming programs, February 26th, you'll hear session 3 with Ecologic and learn about forest regeneration tools and techniques that they use. Also, Arbor Day week is coming up, and we have a great speaker, Guardians of the Canopy, Protecting, Restoring, and Celebrating Atlanta's Old Growth Forest. There's also a lot of opportunities that you can sign up for planting new trees throughout the Atlanta area, seedling giveaways at Trees Atlanta and other spots. So please check our calendar. And finally, we'll be sending out a survey today, and we would love any of your feedback so we can continue to bring you education programs that will serve you in protecting and improving Atlanta's urban forests. So thank you all so much for being here today. And T, thank you so much for sharing what you and Ecologic are doing in the community so we can all help with forest regeneration in the spots and the sites that we are working and living in. So thank you all. Take care.